All right, hello everyone. Thanks for making it out tonight to the very first Beyond the Beers series event. We are calling this one the behind the scenes tour of Ramskeller. I know that these are very challenging times for a lot of us and a lot of other people in the world, and we are so excited that you guys are here tonight. And we hope that this is a fun and educational webinar for you. First off, I want to thank everybody that's here tonight. We could not be able to do these events without you guys. We cannot be able to do this without our members that are here. We have around 8 members of the Alumni Association that are here. And also a huge shout out to Jeff Callaway and his team for helping put these webinars on, because we would not be able to do a behind the scenes tour without you guys. And if you guys want to take a quick minute while I'm talking, you guys can open up your chat and change your to spot from all panelists to all panelists and attendees. And there you can type your name, what year you graduated, where you're from, if you're from a different state or a different country. Feel free to just share that information out to everybody if you would like. Many people here tonight, like I said, are alumni members. We can't do this without your help. So thank you so much for being members. In a couple of minutes, I'm going to go ahead and put where you can hear more information about membership if you're ever interested in becoming a member as well. As a reminder, this is a webinar, so all people are muted except for myself and Jeff. And also, we cannot see you on your cameras, so if you guys are eating dinner, we're not going to see you chomping down on food. Don't worry about it. Don't have to hide from your camera either. In just a moment too, I'm also going to add to the chat some information about technology issues. So if you're having any problems, you can click on this link, or you can email me at corey.slack@callowstate.edu, and I'd be happy to call you or walk you through any technology issues that you would have. I will also be putting down there a web link that has all of our upcoming virtual events from now until the end of the year, and then a couple in 2021 as well. So feel free to look at those, browse through the other events. There's lots of different series and opportunities that we have for people to engage with Colorado State University. Without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Jeff. We are so excited to be able to kicking off this series, especially down in Denver. Usually we would have a Denver beer pairing around this time, and we couldn't do that because of COVID this year. So we're excited to partner with the Fermentation and Sciences program, and especially Jeff in general. He is the Associate Director of the Fermentation Sciences and Technology program, and with the College of Health and Human Sciences here at Colorado State University. So go ahead and take it away, Jeff. It's all you.
Thanks, Corey. So I'm actually not going to keep this on. I am in public, but I'm alone here. We've closed the bar, so I'll give you guys a quick tour of out here in the Ramskeller for those of you that are familiar down here. It is actually open with limited hours, and people are allowed to have like one drink. It's all socially distanced, so pretty cool that it's still open to a limited degree. Like Corey said, my name is Jeff Callaway. I'm the Associate Director for the Fermentation Science and Technology program. I've been in this role in some capacity or another for coming up on 8 years. The Fermentation Science program was a bit of a dream when I was a graduate student here quite a while ago. There's a whole story there, but a lot of serendipity, and I was able to come back and take on this role. One of the things that this role has led me to do, or had the privilege that I've been able to do, is be involved in creating the Ramskeller brew house. So when we say Ramskeller, there is a bit of disambiguation that we have to do. So we are in right now the Ramskeller Pub and Grub, which has been here for 50 years, just over, well, 51 years now, since 1968. But the new thing that we're talking about is the Ramskeller brew house. So that's the brewery within. So right now we're in the Pub and Grub, and we're going to be going into the brewery here. Cool mountain scene there with a bunch of the donors that made this possible. I'll talk about that a little bit more as we go in. All right, I will say, I'll point out too, if any of you know any of the Sitzman family or the Irving Brown alums, see, I don't think that's going to adjust very well. We have a cool light there that says Irving Brown Heritage Room. We have a classroom next to the brewery, so our students get to go in there and use it for meetings and actually some classes. So that's been a great facility. So what I'm going to do here, I feel free to ask, chats and questions as we go. I don't have to stick to any streamlined presentation. My thought here is I'm just going to take you through kind of the rough brewing process in our facility and kind of talk about the science a little bit, but mostly the relationships and just the process flow. So really, one of the catchphrases that we like to use here at CSU is from field to foam. So we have a number of initiatives that are in process across campus. But in terms of this talk, from field to foam, we're kind of talking about the raw materials, right? The start in the field. So that's your barley, your hops, your water, and actually your yeast. Yeast is environmental. It's out in nature. It's in the dirt. It's on fruit. You can collect it anywhere. So really, all of the raw materials for brewing start in essentially, outside some field somewhere. So right now I'm in our milling room. This is our 2-roller mill, little clear tube there so you can see the auger. So we would actually dump barley malts into here, and it will get milled into something called grist. The grist is just kind of the crushed barley, but it's very specific how it's crushed. It's not like flour, so it's very, very precise how that needs to be done. We can see what's going on here as brewers, right? Look at the quality of our grist, and it gets fed up this tube via this auger into, it's kind of hard to see because we've got some stuff in front, but this is our grist bin. So the science for if there's anybody that are home brewers out there, or anybody that's brewed, there's a lot more science to it than a lot of home brewers realize. And the grist, as we use it in the brewing process, we have a limited amount of time that we want to add it to water. So we're basically collecting our entire grist all at once. So we're not milling right into the vessel. We're storing it first so that we have it all done and then we can go. And I will say, I like to get into a stream of consciousness and just ramble. And without you guys here in person, I can't see eyes glazing over or excitement and twinkles in the eyes. So I'm kind of lost as to direction and how interesting what I'm saying is. So bear with me and feel free to interrupt me. So from that grist bin, we have, instead of an auger, this is called a chain and disc system. So there's actually a chain here with these little discs just inside this tube that will carry our grist. The reason we're not using an auger here as well is an auger is gonna continue to chew up the grist. So we mill it just perfectly. We don't then want to ruin it in an auger if we don't have to, because then we're losing control of the grind that we have. And this chain and disc or cable and discs, there's different technologies, is much more gentle on that cracked barley on our malt. And also, we're in a very tight space here, down here in the basement of the Ramskeller. Augers need big sweeping motions, and this chain and disc can turn in 90s. It's on a 180 here as it goes back. You probably can't see that all that well, but we're able to work in much tighter environments here. All right, so our grist then comes along, and it actually gets dropped here into something called the Grist Hydrator. Really, all that means is the grist is coming in, and we have water coming in at the same time. So this is our mash mixer. So this vessel is where we're basically making a porridge or a cereal, and we're using water at a very specific temperature, which will activate certain enzymes that were set up for us in the malt by maltsters. So the barley is malted before it gets to us, and they basically get everything staged. So we're ready for the brewing process. We add water at a certain temperature that activates enzymes that is going to determine to some degree the strength of our beer at the end. We can have drier tasting beers, right? So where there's less remaining sugar, which will actually give us more alcohol, more fermentable sugars, or we can end up with a sweeter beer and less fermentable sugars, or anywhere in between. So there's some of the science there. After we mash, which generally takes about an hour, we've converted everything, and this just looks like basically a big pot of porridge, oatmeal, if you will. We're gonna pump it out of this mash mixer into our lauter tun. I'm gonna turn a light on so I can show you inside the lauter tun.
And Jeff, while you do that, we have a quick question too, is what does malting mean?
Awesome, cool. All right, thank you for that, because I never know how deep to go. So malting is a process where we take malt, or barley rather, sorry, we take barley, or really any grain. You can do this with any grain. You can do it with wheat and amaranth, any number of things. There's a lot of gluten-free malt as well. But basically you take the grain, you steep it. So you have to remember that whether it's a barley kernel or a wheat berry, whatever it is, that's a seed. That wants to grow into a plant, right? It's a grass. So we're going to take all those seeds, right, whether it's the barley or wheat or whatever, steep it in water and basically mimic the conditions that is going to encourage that seed to grow. It's going to start the process of turning into a plant. A seed is really just a package, stored up of energy storage and genetic material so that plant can propagate itself. So we're hijacking the nature's process and using water at first, and this is what maltsters do. Brewers aren't doing this. Using water to encourage the plants to start germinating. So we're going to steep them, get the plants germinating. They're activating and creating enzymes that are going to break down those complex carbohydrates, which is the stored energy inside the barley cell or wheat seed. And the maltster is going to take that to just the point where the plant wants to start growing, and then they're going to shut it down. They're going to stop it. They're going to dry it out. So then they're going to, depending on further processing, they're going to make just kind of a base malt, leave it there. They'll kiln it a little bit to give it a little bit of color, but they can kiln it or roast it to any varying levels of degrees. So a lot of the color of the beer, whether it's your lightest beer to your darkest beer, is coming from what the maltster does to that barley malt. So they'll put it in basically a big oven, and they can make it any number of colors. So they can leave it pretty yellow, turn it kind of to orange and red, and then even roast it, and you get your browns and blacks. So more or less, that's malting. We're hijacking nature's process and then basically putting a stop to it until the brewers are ready to reactivate it, which is what we do with that warm water. And it gets those enzymes going again. It converts, again, those carbohydrates into fermentable sugars. So basically we're looking for maltose, glucose, fructose, right? Things like that. So it's a big porridge when it's here in the mash mixer, and you can see just a big paddle there. It just mixes around. It's a big tun, big vessel. This is called the lauter tun. This is a lauter vessel. Sometimes these vessels are combined into one. We've like them separated out here so the students can see exactly what each vessel is supposed to do, break down the process as much as possible, and a few other reasons that I'll explain here in a little bit. But so this lauter tun basically has a false bottom. It's tough to see there, but that's a kind of a screen down there at the bottom, and then we have some rakes. So the point here, what we're going to do is we want to separate the liquid fraction from the solid fraction. So we had our porridge, we've pumped it over. There's a false bottom screen here. We're going to use, remember I said it's very important how we mill the malt. We're going to use the husk part, the outside, sorry, I would use two hands, so kind of imagine that. A seed kernel, right? You have your husk on the outside, which is filled with tannins and a lot of stuff that we don't actually want in a beer, but it's a great filter material. So sorry if you can't hear me, that's an air compressor that just kicked on. Won't be on long. We're going to break that kernel apart. So we want to break up the endosperm inside, which is all the carbohydrate sugar stuff, as much as possible, while leaving that husk as intact as possible. It's a pretty tough job that the mills have to do. You can imagine that's a little bit challenging. But in any case, we end up with our porridge here where the liquid will drain through the false bottom. We'll go through a process of setting that grain bed where all that fibrous material will via Stokes' law and a bunch of things like, particulate and settle out. and we'll create a pretty natural filter. So we'll collect that, the liquid fraction, like I was saying, which is now called sweet wort, W-O-R-T. Wort is just the really sugary liquid before it's beer. So it's sweet wort. We'll collect that, and it will actually go over to our kettle. But we don't just take the liquid that was there. There's still a ton of sugar that's locked up in that filter bed. So we will do something that we call sparge. So you can kind of see this ring in here at the top. It's got a bunch of little nozzles. We'll mist water over the grain bed here as we're collecting liquid. So there's a series of pipes. There's, again, I'm not going to go too deep here. This grant helps us keep us from collapsing the grain bed. We don't want to lose our natural filter. If we pull too fast, it will suck down, and then it will be a stuck mash. We won't collect liquid anymore. So there's a lot of kind of deep stuff here. But series of pipes, the liquid will come out of the louder ton, go through these pipes, and then over into the kettle. But if we were to stop with just the liquid that we mashed in with, we would be leaving a ton of sugar behind. If you're familiar with old English beers, there's kind of the old high shilling beers, right? Like the high gravity beers would have been these what are called first runnings. So you could brew different beers if you wanted with just these first runnings. And then when you sparge and you rinse that grain bed and collect all the extra sugars, you could create a second beer. However, typically that's all mixed together. So that's all our sweet wort that goes into the kettle. The kettle, we did combine vessels here, which I'll talk about here in a second. But the kettle is where we're gonna boil. We're gonna boil that sweet wort, and then we're going to add hops. And depending on the style of beer, we're gonna add hops all throughout the brewing process. Again, just depending on the style of beer. I can get into that more if you guys are interested. But basically, we're gonna boil this, which is gonna deactivate any enzymes, gonna kill any microbes. Again, hops, barley, malt, all that is are agricultural products. So they're not exactly sterile, right? So we wanna make this food grade, so we boil to sterilize it. We drive off volatile compounds that we don't want in the beer. There's a lot of sulfur smells and things like that come from the grain that we wanna drive off so that you're not experiencing it in your beer unless you want. There are a few beers that will maintain some of those, what we would generally call off flavors. So a number of reasons we boil. After we boil, we now have what's called bitter wort, because the hops are the bittering agent. They're kind of the bittering backbone to that sweet malt. So it's bitter wort or hopped wort. But now we have all that hop material in there. During the boil, proteins will aggregate and come out of solution. A lot of things from the malt will come out. So we have a lot of stuff in the bitter wort that we don't want to ferment. We don't want to carry it through the process. So we have to get rid of it. So we go through what's called a whirlpool process. Sometimes there's a separate vessel. For this time, we don't have a lot of space down here, so we have a combination vessel. It's a kettle whirlpool. And really all a whirlpool is it creates a tangential flow. So we get, I don't know if I want to make this, but I guess I'll say it kind of like inside a toilet, right? You just get it, you get the liquid spinning around, but in this case, it's not going down a drain. The liquid would get pumped out the bottom, or it would actually get pumped out the bottom of the vessel. And then we'll see if we can see it. That little elbow down there that you guys, I think can see, there's a drain. And then there's a little elbow there, and a little piece of macaroni that's turned. So that's coming in at a tangential angle, right? So meaning it's not straight into the liquid, it's at about a 45. So we're pumping the bitter wort out of the vessel, going through a pump, and then based on how we have valve selection, it goes back into the vessel, gets everything spinning around, get all the liquid spinning around, and what that does for us, all the solids that have from the hop debris and the proteins that I mentioned and just all that stuff will center into the bottom center of the vessel. Kind of a cone is what we would call it, and that's called Trub, T-R-U-B. Basically, it's German for garbage. So you can imagine it's not something we want. So once we've done that and collected a lot, again, it's just kind of a very natural way to separate the solids out. Once we do that and let things settle a little bit, we will pump out this hopped wort, and rather than recirculate it back into the vessel, it will go through a heat exchanger. Heat exchanger, for those of you with a dairy background, right, you recognize this immediately. Basically, this is a series of plates where the liquid is going to go in and then get pushed into the middle of these plates. So it's you know, a lot of surface area, very small amounts of liquid. And in an opposing direction, we have, this is a two-stage heat exchanger. So first we have city water, which is going the opposite way, which takes off a lot of the heat from that, from the boiling, right? This was just boiling. So now we're carrying a lot of that heat away. You got to think of heat as, you know, I mean, something that we're moving around, right? So we're now taking it out of the wort. And then the smaller stage, we actually have glycol, which can get colder than water. But just because of physics and the way things work, glycol doesn't actually have the same carrying capacity for heat as water does, but it can get colder. So we can basically polish or get the worts to the exact temperature that we want. So after we come out of the heat exchanger, we will go through a Coriolis meter, which I'll come back to some of the technology. Let me see, it's this kind of funny looking device right here. This tells us what how much sugar is in the solution and how much of the solution we have. So it's a mass flow meter. It goes through there. Here we'll add oxygen. So we have an oxygen tank back there. We'll inject oxygen into the liquid. So when we boiled, it drove all the oxygen out of the liquid. At this stage of the process, we want oxygen. So we're oxygenating our wort. It's not connected now, but we have some hoses that you can see that we would connect right here to one of our fermenters. So we would push the wort, the bitter wort, into one of these fermenters and add yeast. That oxygen that we put in is for the yeast. So the yeast that we add, they first need to multiply. So the oxygen allows them to grow and build strong cell walls and basically proliferate, so we get a whole lot of them. But once they grow to a certain point, they can't grow anymore. They consume all the oxygen. So after that happens, we don't want oxygen interfacing with our product anymore. They consume all that oxygen. They then switch from growing and multiplying to fermenting. So instead of producing more yeast cells, they produce CO2, carbon dioxide, and alcohol, as well as a lot of other compounds that give us some of the flavors we like in beer. So some banana flavors, clove flavors, rose, geranium. There's a lot of different flavors that yeast contributes to the beer. So depending on the beer, it will ferment in here for anywhere from a few days to several weeks or months, depending on the style of beer. And then it will get potentially filtered or at least transferred over to our bright beer tank. We have in here right now a Doppelbock that we submitted to the Great American Beer Festival. Fortunately, we didn't win any awards, so that's for a lot of reasons. I can talk about that separately, but all good. So this beer was made in March, and it just hung out. It's been kind of our COVID beer, so it's kind of our quarantine Doppelbock. So that'll be ready for us when things truly open up. And from this bright beer tank, we will make the beer really cold, which begins kind of the maturation and preservation process. And then you see some of these tubes here. That is how we inject CO2. So the carbon dioxide gives us the bubbliness of the beer, so we control how much of that carbonation that we get, and we're doing that in this vessel. And then from there, we keg the beer, and then it's for sale, in the Ramskeller, at least in normal times.
Jeff, quick question.
Yep.
On that. How many kegs does one tank hold?
So that's a good question. So this is a 10 hectoliter brewing system. So a hectoliter is 100 liters. 10 hectoliters is about 8.5 barrels. So when you think about a barrel of beer, and each keg is half a barrel. So theoretically, if there was 100% efficiency, we would end up with right about 16 or 17 kegs from each batch of beer. Things are not that efficient for us in here for a number of reasons. We're an educational facility. We're still setting it up and building it, and there's a lot of losses. But we end up with kind of 10, 12, 14 kegs if we're doing a full batch. Sometimes we're testing limits and we brew smaller batches. But theoretically, that's what we could get up to. Would be about 16 or 17, though normally it's more in the 12 zone for us. All right, so that's basically the brewing process. That's a high-level overview. I'm happy to go through again and just kind of point out some of the technology. I can talk about kind of the donors and some of those stories and how that's happened. I should have said this at the beginning. I can talk for hours about this stuff, and sometimes people want me to, and I do. That's not what's on the docket tonight. So if you guys want to put in the chat what you would like to see or have me talk about, I'm happy to steer direction a little bit based on your feedback.
And Jeff, I just got a couple more private messages too. Number one is, what is your favorite part about teaching fermentation sciences?
Okay. So the best part, right, is really the uniqueness and the excitingness of it for me. I really like startup culture. So for just building and starting a program, that alone was enough for me. Just getting to work with the industry, the university, and this is not our only facility, right? So I've been building other stuff. That's enough to keep me, satisfied for a while. But also now working with the students, we have a very unique student base, very non-traditional. A lot of the students in our program are coming to us after they've already had a career or two. They have maybe a degree. Sometimes they already have 6 or 7 degrees, like PhDs and whatnot, coming from all different walks of life back to this program because they want to get into this industry. So getting to work with students that really know they want to be here, they really want this knowledge, is just a bit different than your average 20, 22-year-old that's generally going through the motions, right? It's a different perspective. So I love getting to work with students like that and pair them with all of our industry partners and network. It puts a smile on my face every time. So that was the first part.
Yeah, okay, that was the first part. Second one was, what is your favorite part of the process of creating a new beer?
The process of creating a new beer. So there's a lot to commercial brewing, right? And I'll say the larger you go in company size, the fewer people that have any input into new types of beer or creating beers, as it were. I have to confess that there was a period a long time ago where I liked doing the recipe development and just exploring what different hops and malts would be like and interact with, and I mean that's what gets a lot of people into home brewing. It's very much that cooking aspect. As I've been around more, I'm a lot more of kind of a gearhead and a tech geek, and so it's the equipment and like what new ways of doing things. How can we get more efficient? How can we do things better and safer? That gets me a lot more excited. But still, it's getting to taste the final products. As we're developing new things, we did Cam's Sour. We did Sour Patch. We did a Sour Patch beer, a sour beer, Cam Sour, I think we called it. And it had like a Sour Patch Kids kind of theme. But we developed that beer, which was awesome. So it's kind of collaborating with people, putting down those ideas. Okay, this is what we want to get to, right? Kind of the end. How do we get there? So backing up, figuring out process-wise, different things. That was a very unique process, that beer for us. So what materials are we going to use? Do we have anything to base this sauce off of? So all of that, the whole beer development. But once the beer was done, we were like, you know what? We should really introduce the classic German style for these styles of beers, where you add a syrup to the beer. So let's see, I may be able to show you guys. We were experimenting with different flavors. So basically, as you order the beer, you would get a pump of a flavor into the beer to totally change the process. Yeah, door's locked. I'm not gonna be able to get through there. But there's very traditional syrups that they use in Germany, so we played with those. And then also, just peach and cherry and different. So like just getting to experiment like that behind the scenes. One, that's fun, just getting to taste that stuff, but doing it with other people, right, and collaborating, it's so fun.
Awesome. Another question that just came in is, are you brewing anything currently?
Not in the Ramskeller. So let me, I guess, back up a little. So funny enough, as like the week that COVID sort of started shutting things down in Colorado, kind of just right before spring break, literally the day before the university announced everything was going to close down, let's see, I'll go look and see if those kegs, we kegged up out of the Bright Beer Tank our first Hazy Ipa. Yep, and there's some of it right there. Hazy's Comet. So a delicious Hazy Ipa. So we kegged it up like the day that was announced. Like they were clicking send as the assistant brewer I had in here at the time was filling those kegs. So we got shut down. That was the last beer that we fully packaged. We were able to work with the industry, our industry partners around here in Fort Collins, where they took the beer and were able to sell it to their clients. So the beer still got out there for people. The Doppelbock had already been brewed. It's a lager, so it ages a lot longer anyway, so it's still hanging out. But we haven't done anything in here really since March. We lost our assistant brewer. Yeah, COVID, he had to move away. I was looking over the summer at hiring another assistant brewer. I'll say our head brewer is Jeff Biegert. He's also employed by New Belgium. He actually came to us through New Belgium. They pay half of his salary, we pay half, but they donate their half, so we get him. But he teaches our brewing classes. He's our head brewer. But frankly, he doesn't have time to also run this facility, so we rely on an assistant brewer. I went through the process of hiring an assistant brewer this summer, but ultimately, because the Ramskeller has to run on limited operations, they're running limited taps. Not going to be a lot of room for our beer. We don't want to take away from any of our industry partners who are going to need those beer sales more than we do. And just as a program, we're also building out in our other laboratory. We have two new, so tune in next month and you'll get a tour of our new brewing labs over there. We're commissioning 2 new brewing systems over there. So from a resource standpoint, there aren't very many of us. It was just too much to keep this facility operational with really nowhere for the beer to go. So it's kind of in a holding pattern. However, what's cool is we have brewing interns, so students in the program that are in here helping us out. Things are in a little bit of a disarray because we'd left, just had to basically abandon it during COVID, with a few exceptions. But a lot of things were left and just kind of hanging out. So they're coming in and organizing things for us and getting prepared. There's water in these vessels, so we're pumping water around. Kind of one of the brewing classes was in here last week. They have to break up into a lot of small groups, but they were basically doing water brews. So they were going through the entire process using. So we have a lot of automation, which is one of the things I can highlight. So much to talk about. So they're seeing what it would be like, but it's with water. Decidedly way more boring than getting to brew beer, but still they're in here and seeing and hearing and kind of getting a feel for it. But we also work. We're a very transdisciplinary program. We work with partners all across campus, and a lot of partners off campus. But one of those relationships is with the the College of Engineering. Multiple departments in that college. So I have a group of engineering students who are helping me do a number of things. Automation stuff, kind of behind the scenes, computer things. We have these Coriolis meters, which I mentioned. These are like $20,000 meters donated, right? We have great industry partners. But very important, right, that we can, as we're going through process, measure the density of the liquid, how much sugar is in there, right? There's a lot of conversions, there's a lot of math there, but also flow and volume, so we know how much liquid and how strong it is, basically. There's a lot of refining and tweaking that we have to do in those things. We have other instruments and things aren't matching up, so those students are working with some of our industry partners and us and our brewing interns to help optimize that type of equipment. So there are things happening in here. A very long-winded way of saying students are in here getting experiences, just not making beer right now. We hope, of course, next year, but COVID stuff. So we'll see how things shake out.
Okay, being a teaching program, how long does it usually take to brew any type of beer, new or one that we've done in the past, from start to finish?
Great question. So we are still brewing in the program. I mentioned our other facilities. We are commissioning new breweries, but we do have an old Sabco system. Sabco is just a company. It's basically a system that's made out of kegs. So it's it's 3 kegs on a stand with burners, and that was donated to us by Doug Odell and the Odell Brewing Company in 2008, way before we were a program. We just had a single class. So our students are still using that. So they're brewing in their classes. There will be effectively 3 brews for a semester in our foundational brewing class. It's actually a lot more than that because each class is broken up into 4 groups. So each group does a brew. So 12 actual beers being brewed over the semester in our other facility. This semester. Next semester, we'll see how things pan out. Typically for that other class, they will do 11 brews over the semester, 10, 11, something like that, a lot. We're doing a lot more brewing. They're kind of, in this first class, it's the fall, they're learning how to brew, right? They're applying everything they've been learning in the classroom to actually getting to do it hands-on. There's a bit of a learning curve there. I mean, it's production, it's manufacturing, so you got to get hands-on to learn. By the second semester, they're ready to rock and roll a little bit more and learn the things that they do, the mistakes they make, the things they do that they don't do, and the impacts on the beer. So they brew a lot more. We can turn a beer around, depending on it all depends on the style. Like an IPA, you could turn around in maybe 9-10 days if you really wanted to push it on a production schedule. That's pretty fast. The beer is. If you get really good, right, your beer really well, you can really tighten things in. But sometimes the beer does what it wants to do. I was on a call this morning with our quality analysis interns and our brewing teams, and 4 beers were brewed recently, right, for the class. So one of the brews, but 4 teams. And one of the yeast pitches just is sluggish. It didn't want to take off. So there's one beer that's way behind all the rest, although theoretically it should be the same. So great learning opportunities for the students. But this Doppelbock was brewed in, I think, February, right? And it's still hanging out and good. So anywhere from, roughly a week and a half, 2 weeks is, 2 weeks is a good, good gauge for some of your beers, up to a year or more, anywhere in between. Obviously, for the program, we're focusing more on the beers that turn around a little bit quicker. We're not doing your big, heavy barley wines and barrel-aged crazy beers. In this first round, students will brew a beer this first semester will brew a beer that's focused on malt. It's a malt-forward beer, so you're really learning, digging deep into what that means and what you're getting out of malt. They'll do a hop-forward beer, and then they'll do a yeast-forward beer. And then typically on that second semester, they'll brew generally one style of beer a whole bunch of times.
Awesome.
See, I told you I could talk forever.
No, you're doing good. These are all great questions. So thank you, everybody who's sending them to me. How many students are in one brew group?
So I guess there's a couple answers to that because I'm not quite sure if you mean like during COVID times or before. Normally, so for the brewing classes, we like to cap those. We like to cap them at about 20, just because of being in facilities like this. It's tough. We also go out historically into industry a lot, and we do tours, and it gets difficult. Sorry, I should move around less. I'm sure that's distracting. We do a lot of tours, and so it gets difficult when you have more than 20. But the nature of the program, I mentioned a lot of non-traditional students, people that already have degrees. That means they're not coming in as freshmen. Most of our students are coming in at kind of a sophomore or junior, sometimes even senior level. So like right now in our foundational brewing class, where they actually get the hands-on stuff, there are about, it was 28, but I think we've settled in around 26 or 27 students for the semester, which is a lot for us. And then that's broken up into 4 groups. So there's roughly 6-7 students per group right now. But normally it would be, about 20 students is what we like in our lab classes. And that might be broken up into 2 groups, and it might be broken up into 3 groups. So we would have sort of a hot side group that's doing all the kind of brewing in the vessels, a cold side, so taking care of the fermenters and making sure everything's ready to pitch, and then a quality side. So they're the ones getting the yeast preps, doing the counts, and doing all the quality things. So it just depends on the year.
Awesome. Next question is, which I think you kind of touched on it a little bit, is how many batches of beer would you say that you make a year?
So, well, in the Ramskeller, not very much. Ideally for us, we can handle about 1 a month, 1 batch a month. We're brewing really less than about 100 barrels a year. So we're one of the smallest breweries in the country in terms of production. But we're legally a production brewery, but not really. And even getting 1 a month is, certainly like with COVID, we're not brewing at all right now. So when I'm properly staffed and the Ramskeller's going and there's all sorts of relationships, I'm always working on stuff so we can do more. Maybe one day we'll be able to get that up to maybe 2 a month theoretically, but so not a ton of beer in the Ramskeller. But over in Gifford, as I mentioned, in a year, there are whether it's, like I said, 3 brews, but that's actually 12 different batches, because the groups in the 1 semester, and then 10 or 11 brews. Now that's going to be totally different this next semester because way more groups, they're just not going to be able to brew that much. So there's a lot for the class, right? There's, maybe 15, 20 brews that the students are doing just in their classwork. But then we also have independent studies, internships, a lot of special projects. We work with industry, so we're testing stuff out. So there gets to be a lot more brews going there, and I can't really quantify that now. I will say that, we're looking forward to working with a lot of our brewing partners more for research once we have the other facilities that I'll showcase next month. Once those are operational, we'll be doing a lot more kind of research brewing as well. Plus, we just launched, you may have seen, if you guys get to kind of CSU news stuff, our new Malt Lab. So that's kind of a fee for service for the industry, but where malt can come in and be tested. So Katie Frometh, our lab manager, can run the analysis on malt that brewers need, which determines a lot of the recipe development. So there's protein content, enzymatic activity, a lot of different things that brewers want to know, and so we can quantify that for them in that Malt Lab. So there will be tests associated with that Malt Lab potentially as well. So for us, it's just more and more brewing. Maybe one day we can get some of our beer in the stadium. We've had some good conversations with the folks at Canvas on that. A lot of people are interested. A lot of friction, COVID not being the smallest one, but all sorts of bureaucracy and other things as well. But yeah, we're always working on stuff for more brewing.
Sweet. The next question is who and how does the equipment get maintained throughout the year, I would assume?
Yeah, great question. So I mentioned those brewing interns. That's how they kind of get to learn. So they get to do some of that work for us. It's on us to a degree. When we have our assistant brewer, that person will do a lot of the maintenance, but it's up to us. The university doesn't just take care of that. And a lot of this stuff is very specialized. To be honest, they wouldn't know how. So we do it. And in some cases, like this is a nitrogen generator. That's the air compressor that went off a little earlier. It's a scroll type air compressor. So, I could go down a whole rabbit hole on technology, but things like that, we'll hire companies in to come do some of the stuff for us. But in general, it's us. The maintenance is, you're looking at a third of the group permanently employed. But then, we have a lot of students and independent studies and interns and stuff to help us. So it's very much an organic grassroots effort.
Cool. And then last question that I have that I've received is, how can you tell how much alcohol is in a new brew, or how do you tell which ones are more hobby or which ones are an IPA?
Cool. So yeah, kind of talking about beer logistics. So alcohol is something that a brewer is going to calculate before, like what they want to get to, right? So there's a calculation, right? They know kind of an efficiency, how much sugar, right, has to be fermented to get that much alcohol, and then how much fermentable sugar they're going to put into the fermenter. So there's a lot of science and calculations that go behind. So again, that COA or certificate of analysis from the malt is pretty important to calculate some of that, as well as just knowing the system. But to calculate alcohol, there's a couple basic calculations. So I mentioned those expensive meters, right, that are measuring the density or the amount of sugar for us. It can be measured in specific gravity, which is just literally the amount of sugar in water, where water is 1.000. And then as you add more sugar, that goes up. So it might go 1.010, 1.065, et cetera, et cetera. And the higher the number, the more sugar that's in there. That doesn't tell you how much of that's fermentable, but again, there's other things that you have a good idea. And it's typically, a beer is not going to ferment back down to the density of water. Alcohol is less dense than water, so there's calculations. But for a basic beer, you might have a specific gravity or Play-Doh or bricks. We actually use Play-Doh in here. So there's standard conversion factors. But let's say a basic beer is 12 or 13 Play-Doh. And those beers typically are going to finish between 2 and 3 Play-Doh. So that 10-ish Play-Doh difference, you plug that into a calculation, and that's going to give you roughly that 5.2% alcohol. But then the higher the Play-Doh, so like a 20 Play-Doh beer, is going to be a lot higher alcohol. But you measure that by, when you make your wort, you take your calculation, you measure, so what we're putting into the fermenter, right? Like the gravity is going to change all the time when we're collecting from the ladder tun into the kettle, because as we're rinsing sugars, it's going to go down, right? The amount of sugar that's there as we continue to rinse. So all we really care about in terms of alcohol calculation is what are we putting into the fermenter? So once it's cooled down, right? Like once we're at the end, right before the yeast starts fermenting, what is our OG, our original gravity? So we take a measurement. You can use a hydrometer. So you have a column of the wort that you would take out and calibrated like glass tube basically that you would spin in it, and it floats based on the density of the liquid. We also have a lot of automated instruments. I don't have the one in here right now, but there's a lot of lab bench-based instruments as well that will give you that calculation. After the fermentation, we measure that again, the density. So then we have our original gravity and our final gravity, and that determines what our alcohol is. That's the calculation. We also have fancy instruments that we can just plug the beer into, and it will tell us exactly what the alcohol is, and it'll even back calculate what it thinks the original gravity was, and what the extract efficiencies and all sorts of fancy numbers are. So which is cool. In terms of how you can tell, it's getting more complicated actually to tell what's a hoppy beer. But in general, right, the maltier beers are going to be the ones that are just sweeter, right? More bread-like, and generally, sweet. Might be caramely, whatever type of sweetness, could be roasty, right? So, you think some of your, old school amber ales and, Scotch ales, porters, stouts, things like that. Malty does not have to be dark, but a lot of times there's a correlation. Whereas the malty beer or the hoppy beers historically were more bitter. So the more bitter you would go, right? So you're thinking your pale ales and your old school IPAs, your India pale ales, right? The stronger pale ales. More hops, that are put in, and those are put in earlier in the boiling process. So it's extracting the bittering compounds. So you can kind of imagine, you start out with something, you have a scale here. So, kind of straight up is neutral, very well-balanced beer. You start out with something very, very sweet, right? We just collected sugar water. We then add hops to the point where we leave it, we take it off of, if you ever taste malt, if you go to Iceland or Europe, you can buy a beverage called malt, and it's basically just that. I mean, it's what we call cloying. I think it's pretty disgusting. It's just too sweet. It's too much down here. So that's why you want to add something to balance that malt, that sweetness. So depending on the amount of hops you add, right? You kind of, hey, we're sweet, less sweet, less sweet. Hey, now we're pretty neutral, a very well balanced beer where it's not particularly bitter and it's not particularly sweet, right? It's maybe other things that are coming to the front. Keep adding the hops, right? And it eventually becomes so bitter that you know, the more bitter it gets, the less people find it pleasurable. However, hops are very unique. They have a lot of other characteristics other than just bitterness. So they have compounds that will make things, they can make the beer taste very, very fruity, like citrus fruity, grapefruits, tropical fruits, oranges, like, I mean, you kind of name it, lemons, limes, like there's a lot of those flavor compounds in hops. There's also very earthy components, right? That will kind of, you know, make a beer more earthy, so kind of the European style beers. And those you can play with quite a bit. There's also oniony characters. There's a lot going on with hops. The later you add those in the boiling process, so boiling, let's just say we boil for an hour, right? Which is a pretty standard, you can do more. But let's say we boil for an hour. If we boil hops for an hour, it takes an hour to fully get all the bitterness out of the hops. It's isomerization is the term, but where we're converting the compounds to the bittering compound that we want. It takes an hour to get that fully. So whatever hops you're adding at 60 minutes before you're done, so when you're just starting to boil, that's how much of the full bitterness you're going to get. You can add hops all throughout the boiling process, and the closer it is to when you stop boiling, the less bitterness that you're pulling out. And then at about the last 15, 20 minutes, in that time period, it's more kind of the flavor of the hops. So again, the orange or the earthiness, the floral, the flower stuff, whatever the compound is. And then when you start getting into, 5 minutes before shutting it off, or even 0, after you've shut off the boil, you're adding hops, you're getting now more of the aroma, which is again, the same kind of fruity, floral, earthy, whatever, but just magnified. So rather than flavor where you're tasting it, it's the aroma where you're smelling it in the beer. And all those things play together, of course. But brewers have really taken it to where we're adding hops now into the fermenters during the whirlpool, all different periods, to where now you're getting, like, when you think of these hazy IPAs that are out, they taste juicy. Like, it's like a kid's juice almost. And that's from the hops. So hops are difficult. Traditionally it'd be like, hey, the amount of bitterness would be the hoppiness. But now it's far more complicated. So, when you see IPAs, pale ales, that's where you're getting more your hop forward beers. And then when you're thinking like, what's a yeast forward beer? It might be more something like a Hefeweizen, where you might get, notes of banana or clove. Those are compounds coming out of the yeasts. Some of the others, a lot of the Belgian beers, they use all sorts of traditionally ingredients, so they're using actual spices and stuff, but also they're using some pretty wild yeasts that produce a lot of flavors. Some things people would decide are objectionable, right? Like kind of horse blanket and cheesy and funky flavors, but some people love them. So a lot of that's coming from the yeast. All right, you said that was the last question, Corey. Did you get any more?
Yeah, no, I think that's the last question. So, which is kind of perfect because it's already 6:24. So
time flies.
I think everybody gets 5 minutes back to their day. So
right.
Again, thank you everybody for making it out. Jeff, thank you so much for doing this as well. I know that you're still on campus. I'm sure you're ready to go home. So thank you for taking the time. And if you guys are interested, please follow us on YouTube. We will have this video posted probably in the next few days. And we will be sending out a survey as well at the end of probably by the end of the week. So thank you so much for everybody being here, and go Rams.
Thanks, Corey. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Yeah.